Sarah, are you a new director? Are you a new director?
Sorry, I was on mute. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
Fine.
I am the new director.
Mr. McNulty, we are live and we are recording, so we are ready to kick off this meeting.
Okay, let's do it. Let's start with the call to order.
We do have a flag available on the screen to do the flag salute if you would like to lead us in that as well.
Okay, me? Happy to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, did we want to go ahead and do the roll call now?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, Mr. Reddy.
Present.
Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson's present. I didn't hear him though.
I didn't hear it either.
Don't hear your audio, Mr. Johnson. But we see you. Mr. Carr.
Here.
Mr. Anderson.
Here.
Dr. Lapidus.
Here.
Okay.
Okay, and then I think the next thing we need to do is administer the oath to the new members of the hearing board.
Yeah, Mr. McNulty, I did put a section under the election of the chair and vice chair. I just thought that maybe the board members could give a brief introduction of themselves. There's some new members and older members, so I thought that it might be appropriate for each just to give themselves a brief introduction.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Mr. Reddy, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Paul Reddy. I am a native of San Luis Obispo. I have been practicing law for approximately 38 years. A lot of real estate, some land use. Served on the Planning Commission of San Luis Obispo for approximately 6 years. Still practicing, and that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lapidus, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Rob Lapidus. I'm a recently retired pulmonary critical care and sleep physician, having practiced my entire career in the Denver, Colorado area. My wife and I moved here to San Luis Obispo County about 3 years ago, and here I am.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Carr, would you like to speak and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Bob Carr, resident of San Luis Obispo County for over nearly 50 years. Native California, born in Kern County. I was a former APCD for the district, retired about 20 years ago. Been on the Planning Commission in City, Rio Grande for about 16 or 17 years.
Great. Mr. Anderson, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jim Anderson. I've lived in the county for about 30 years now. Live in North County in Atascadero, work down here at the refinery in Napomo. During that time, worked a lot with the Air Pollution Control District over the years with Bob Carr and Larry Allen and now Gary Willey, and taught environmental engineering courses up at Cal Poly.
Great, thank you. Mr. Johnson, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, we don't hear you. I know, still having an audio challenge. Let's see if we can. Okay, you're muted now. Try to unmute yourself again. Now we can hear you. Oh, no.
No.
Okay, well, I can say that Mr. Johnson comes from the South Coast Air Quality Management District, And I do know that he has been on the board for quite some time and has extensive experience in air quality management. I believe he lives in Morro Bay, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. Okay.
Do we have an alternate way of connecting him to audio?
Yeah, so Dr. John or Mr. Johnson, if you wanted to call in, you could also connect to audio that way. Let me scroll past this slide for a second. So here's the phone number if you wanted to call in and get audio.
I think that's going to be useful.
Yeah. And I do see that we have a hand raised from a member of the public. I'm not sure. We will have the opportunity to speak on items that are not on the agenda. And then we'll also have public participation for the items that are on the agenda. So I didn't know, Mr. McNulty, if you wanted me to, okay, so she lowered her hand, so I must have answered her question.
So I think at this point, once we get the audio figured out, we should administer the oath.
Yes. Do you want to give Mr. Johnson a minute to get audio connected, hopefully?
I think that's probably the best thing to do.
Okay.
You want me to run some political commercials?
If I'm trying to call him.
That's the last thing I want to hear, right?
Yeah, this is true.
You can monetize it though, it might help.
Let's see.
I can see him. Alyssa, is it? It looks like there's the blue box with the white dots in it up in the corner of his screen. Does that have anything to do with why we can't hear him?
No.
Okay.
No, he's unmuted. Sometimes there's some connectivity issues with Zoom. I almost want to recommend that he close out and then come back into the meeting and see if that helps. He says, okay. I should have learned ASL before we started the meeting. Okay, so give him a second to come back in and hopefully that'll resolve his audio. Yeah. Okay, let's see.
Just so you all know that the Superior Court is doing the same thing. All the proceedings are Zoomed, and so you've got lawyers all over in their houses with their pets and their kids, and then you have defendants in the criminal cases who are all located someplace, and everyone's got background noise. It's really kind of crazy, but no one's going to court anymore if they're a misdemeanor. It's all happening on Zoom.
Carl, are you outside?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, Bob.
Are you outside, Carl?
No, this is just my my
I don't think there's audio still, Mr. Johnson.
Here, I'll take it off. I'm really here in my cubicle.
So Tim, I spoke with one of the local judges recently who was doing a Zoom trial. Not a good experience.
I just did an appeal where I had to read through 4 transcripts of 4 different hearing dates that happened on Zoom with multiple witnesses, and it was a disaster.
Right. And one of my partners did an evidentiary hearing on Zoom.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
No.
We still can't hear you, Mr. Johnson. I'm going to have Megan Field give you a call on the number that we have and see if we can get your audio sorted out. Mr. McNulty, do you want to go ahead and administer the oath for the 4 board members we have audio for, and then we can move on with approving the minutes? And then we can administer the oath once we get Mr. Johnson on audio.
Okay, I suppose that's fair enough. Let's do that. Do you want to administer the oath?
Would you like me to?
Yes, please. I think that's the.
Okay. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. The language that I have for administration of the oath is for each individual board member. Is that okay? Do you want me to administer it separately, or do you want me to just have each board member state their name when I read the section?
Let's do the latter. That's going to make more sense, I think.
Have the board members just state their name?
Yes.
Okay. So I and board members, please state your name.
Art Carr.
I, Jim Anderson.
I, Rob
I-
Lapidus.
I, Paul Reddy.
That's-
Mr.
I,
Carr.
Jim Anderson.
I think I heard Bob.
Bob said his.
Yes.
Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
I do.
I do.
I do.
Do we get Mr.
I
Justin
heard-
Anderson?
I heard 3 of them.
I do.
I heard Mr. Reddy. Mr. Anderson, you do?
I do.
Okay, thank you. I heard Mr. Lapidus and I heard Mr. Carr.
Okay.
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 we've
So now
got the
the
administration.
now we
Go
have
ahead.
if we move the agenda to the approval of the board minutes from the last time.
Yes,
I think we have
we'll
3.
have to have Mr. Johnson not vote, but we can still approve them with a vote of 4 if so moved.
Right. So let's try to do that.
Okay.
No approval of minutes. Meeting, previous meeting.
Say that again, Bob.
No approval of the minutes, the previous meeting.
So Bob moves approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
Thank you. Okay,
Second
do
it.
I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Reddy? Mr. Reddy, I have Mr. Carr as the motion maker and I have Mr. Reddy as the second. Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Reddy?
I,
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
I,
Thank you. Dr. Lapidus?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion is approved, unanimous vote. Okay,
Okay, so the next thing we need to do is the board needs to organize itself into the election of a chair and a vice chair. And
Yeah.
it might be worthwhile waiting till we resolve this audio issue before we do that so that we can make sure everyone participates.
okay. Mr. Johnson's calling in right now.
Okay.
Okay. Can he hear? I wonder, I think I probably have to put him in it as an attendee. Okay, I see. Okay. Give me 1 second.
Showing a muted microphone. Now it's unmuted.
Oh yeah, we're just trying to wait for Mr. Johnson not showing up. His phone number is not showing up in the attendees, so I can promote him to panelist so that he can speak freely. Mr. Johnson, do you show that you're in the webinar on your phone? You can just nod. No. Okay.
He's being held hostage.
Can you show me the last 4 digits of the number? $669. Or is he having trouble getting in? Or maybe he needs to see the number again. Does he need to see the number? So the teleconference phone number is 669-900-6833. Thank you all for your patience. Nothing like being put under immense pressure to try and get your audio and everything working. I have been through one of those court proceedings via Zoom, and it's not fun.
We all see the same pictures on the screen.
There we go. There we go. You got it? Okay. Okay, I'll do it. Oh, it doesn't allow me to. Okay. So, Mr. Johnson, you can unmute yourself now on your phone and we should be able to hear you.
Hello, Mr. Johnson.
It doesn't look like he's able to unmute himself.
I heard something.
I can't.
You know, we could do
Mr.
it.
Johnson, Megan is texting you a picture of the microphone settings so you can know where to adjust the mute.
So there's an alternative that we can do. We can hold them up to a have him call in and hold his phone up to a speakerphone.
Yeah, we could do that. Do you want to, or maybe just, actually, let's set it up in the auditorium. Can you use my cell phone? Here. Megan will just call him on my cell phone and set it up in the auditorium so we don't get feedback with my microphone. No, just call him on his cell phone with my cell phone and hold it up to the speakerphone in the auditorium. Oh, wait. Okay, so we have Mr. Johnson on, we have him on speakerphone. I'm just trying to coordinate how I can not hear his speaker, but be able to control him to speak when need to be spoken to. Hold on one second. Give me one more minute. Thank you all for being so patient.
How about them Dodgers? Giants fan, Tim. You're a Giants fan, aren't you?
Well, actually, being from San Diego, I can't really be a Dodgers fan or a Giants fan, but my daughter, who's living in LA right now at USC, is super excited about the Dodgers.
Especially Mookie Betts.
Let's try.
Yeah, she's spending more time on baseball and basketball than she should probably.
Okay, we have Mr. Johnson on the phone, so he is able to hear and able to speak when he speaks into his phone. You want to go ahead and give your introduction, Mr. Johnson?
I thought you did a fabulous job, but yes, I am a retired former executive, South Coast Air Quality Manager.
Barely audible at the end.
It was, or barely audible?
Barely.
Yeah, I cut the beginning.
Again, 25 years of experience in regional air quality.
Okay, great.
Nice.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that, you guys.
You did great, Alyssa.
Okay, great. Well, Mr. McNulty, do you want me to go ahead and administer the oath for Mr. Johnson as well?
Yeah, let's take care of that.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, please say aye. Mr. William Johnson.
I, Mr. William Johnson,
Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay. So, board members, I'm Tim McNulty, your counsel, and I think the first thing we need to do, because we have vacancies in the chair position and in the vice chair position, is to accept a nomination for the chair of the hearing board. I think it's going to take a vote of at least 3 of you to elect someone to be the chair, but probably the best way to do that is to make a motion to nominate someone to be the chair.
I'll move to nominate William Johnson to be the chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Alyssa, you want to take a roll call vote?
Yes, sir. Okay, so the motion is to appoint Mr. Johnson as the chair, and that was by Mr. Reddy and seconded by Dr. Lapidus. Okay. Sorry, we're getting a little bit of feedback. Okay, Mr. Reddy.
Aye.
Dr. Lapidus.
Aye.
Was that an aye?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
And Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, now we need a motion to nominate a vice chair.
We nominate James Anderson as vice chair.
Jim Anderson as vice chair?
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Reddy? Okay. This is for Mr. Anderson as vice chair. Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Reddy?
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Lapidus?
Aye.
Mr. Carr?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
And Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Thank you.
You're only allowed to vote aye once. Okay, the next thing that we need to do is to have public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Sorry if I'm taking over your job, just tell me to shut up.
No, that's perfect. That's totally fine. Actually, it's anybody can facilitate.
That's chair's job now.
Yep, we have a chair now.
Oh, there we go. Good point.
The only challenge is the chair has audio issues and it's causing feedback.
Well, yeah, so anyway, I don't think we need a motion to do that. So let's just go ahead and open up public comment to items not on the agenda.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, I will help you facilitate if there's public comment on items not on the agenda. Okay, and let's also go over real quick before we get into public comment that the ways the members can participate. So if there are people that are on the YouTube live stream and would like to participate during public comment or on items that are on the agenda later, they can call in using the phone number that's on the screen. To raise your hand, if you have called in, you would hit *9. To raise your hand, if you are within the Zoom teleconference, there should be a little option at the bottom of the screen, depending on what device you're on, to raise your hand virtually. And any written public comments that were received prior to 1 p.m. on Wednesday are part of the administrative record and posted to the district's website. And then with that being said, it does look like we do have a couple of folks that are interested in speaking on items not on the agenda. Mr. McNulty, I should give the public oath too. And so members of the public that are speaking will need to state their first and last name and say that they accept the oath.
You know, I don't think we need to do that for items that aren't on the agenda. So
okay, we don't.
If we want,
okay,
we can
just
do that.
on.
Yeah.
Only on the items that are on the agenda.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So then without further ado, let me share my speaker timer. And we are limiting public comment to 2 minutes. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. All right. Okay, and then the first speaker is going to be Ken Olson. You can unmute yourself, Ken.
Good morning. My name is
Hello.
Ken Olson. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, my name is Ken Olson, and I just wanted to bring up to find out if the weather solved wind fencing has been looked into, and I really think that would be a great idea. And to have no more closures of the beach. Our OHV money is pays for us to be able to use it, and I think installing the weather solved fencing and getting rid of all this orange fencing that is all over the dunes and making it look ugly, and remove this non-native vegetation that has been put in. it's a wonderful place that many of us enjoy, and everything that's been done so far has not done anything. So I hope we can get everything solved, get our camping area opened back up so that we can be on the beach and social distance. And that's about all I have to say today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, Alyssa, perhaps we need to remind people that this is for the time for items that are not on today's
Not on the agenda. Okay. Okay, next speaker is JD Shaw. And this is for items that are not on the agenda. So if you have comments related to the items that we have on the agenda a little later, there will be an opportunity for you to speak on those.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I think I did separate out the non-agenda items. So I am a retired Navy veteran who loves the outdoors, beautiful spaces in California, and clean air. But I also love OHV and firmly believe all can coexist. And I have a few comments on some various area issues not in the mitigation report. First, where does NAPOMO rank in air quality for California? I do not see it as hazardous on the government sites such as airnow.gov. In fact, it shows as green for California. Next, is there any medical data that shows NAPOMO residents experience more health issues than other San Luis County areas? I have not seen any. If there's not any evidence of health data, and this is a green area of the state, why are we wasting incredible amounts of money and resources? Next, is the composition of the PM10 being looked at? Not all PM10 is equal or harmful. The 2020 Scripps report last month showed composition in various parts of the US, and Professor Russell even stated that many places in the US waive action on naturally occurring PM10. They also state that PM10 is largely filtered by the nasal and tracheal passages and does not reach the respiratory system. And not only does the body filter PM10, this county actually allowed the natural barrier of the eucalyptus trees to be cut down and reduce blockage from the mesa, and now wants to cover up the natural sand dunes with artificial vegetation. I understand California has standards for PM10, but why are we not looking at PM 2.5 since that is the more dangerous particulate? Again, referring to the Scripps 2020 report, they show 80% of the PM 2.5 is occurring in the shoreline before the dunes even come into effect. In closing, with APCD reports from Will Harris, and the Scripps report, we have three very well-respected institutions with different conclusions. And I want to know why we are not putting these three scientific bodies together to create one agreed-on report. When I lead a team that has different inputs, I take the leadership and task them to get a single answer. Without that, no action should be taken. If we don't have documented health issues, we have naturally occurring particulate, and we have conflicting scientific reports, we should not be spending millions out annually to shut down the dunes. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shaw, Mr. Shaw, can you state your name and where you live, please?
Bob, we don't ask where they live.
We don't.
No, we just asked for their first and last name.
Oh.
Okay. That was all the members of the public that I had that were requesting to speak on items not on the agenda.
Okay.
Okay. We did the approval of the minutes. So now we are getting to our hearing board business. And it looks like we're starting that with an introduction by the SLO APCO. You're muted, Gary. There you go.
Good morning, hearing board directors and our public participants. This part of today's hearing serves as an informational update to the hearing board on stipulated order of abatement 1701 and as a public workshop for this year's annual work plan. As required by last year's modification to the order, State Parks has worked with the scientific advisory group called the SAG to produce this year's work plan. Based on discussions with the SAG, I provisionally approved this plan, which allowed it to be workshopped today. Although no plan is perfect, the district and SAG feel that this plan makes progress we need to address the dust flume. Before we get started on the workshop, I'd like to point out we have new leadership at State Parks. On August 18th, the governor appointed Armando Quintero as the new director for State Parks in general. And prior to that, in July, the governor appointed Ms. Sarah Miggins as the new Deputy Director of OHV. And Sarah will introduce herself later under the State Parks presentation. And to start with, we'll have OHV's Environmental Manager, John O'Brien, introduce Sarah and then go over their 2020 report and work plan. And that'll be followed by the Scientific Advisory Group's Dr. Jack Gillies, who will go over the SAG's participation and the results. And then APCD Senior Scientist Carl Tupper will update the board on air quality changes this last year and why we found the plan provisionally approvable. And although hearing board directors can ask questions at any time, we will pause after Carl's presentation to take hearing board director questions before returning to the public for their questions and comments. After public comment, the hearing board members can then ask questions of the presenters based upon public comment. And with that, I'll turn it over to John O'Brien, who will go over State Parks plan.
Hey, Gary, this is Tim. I don't know whether this is a time that I should speak about an issue that's been raised about whether or not the Political Reform Act prevents the participation of one of our hearing board members in the item. But I thought, given it, we're sort of at the outset of this item, it might be a good time to talk about that if that's appropriate.
Of course, that's up to the chair, Director Johnson.
Hold on one second. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I'd like Mr. Acknowledgement to review his findings.
I know we're having some feedback, and I'm wondering if it has to do with, I think that he's disconnected from the webinar on his phone, but he might be getting feedback from my speaking.
I took it off the speaker. I'm holding up. Can you hear me?
Oh, that's better.
That's much better.
Okay. There you go.
Yes, I would appreciate Mr. McNulty discussing the issues in regards to a conflict of interest.
So the reason I raised this was we received correspondence from members of the community, and in particular, an attorney who lives in Napomo, raising the question of whether or not Mr. Anderson, one of our new hearing board members, has a conflict of interest under the law that would prevent him from participating in making a decision regarding the abatement order here that we're going to discuss today. One question is whether or not the board's actually making a decision today. You're not really agendized to make any decisions, but if we put that aside for a second, the issue is whether or not participating in today's hearing would be a component of participating in making a decision later on, or perhaps at the next hearing. And the issue, Mr. Anderson, is under the Political Reform Act and the regulations that have been created to implement it by the Fair Political Practices Commission, a public official cannot participate in making a decision where they have a disqualifying interest. And I don't know too much about your interests here, so I'm going a little bit on the public record that I know of, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that you're an employee of Phillips 66, and that Phillips 66 is a source of income for you still at this point. And if that's true, then you would have a financial interest in Phillips 66. Now, an important point here is that Phillips 66 is not explicitly involved in any decision that the board might make. They're not the subject of the abatement order. Their property is not the subject of the abatement order. But nevertheless, if it's possible to have a conflict here, even if there isn't an explicit effect on Phillips, and it's kind of a close call, I think. The question is there a financial effect on Phillips 66 from decisions that are made on the abatement order by this board that is reasonably foreseeable and material. And so that's like trying to delve into the regulations of the Fair Political Practices Commission. But it kind of boils down to this. Is it a realistic possibility, meaning more than just hypothetical or theoretical, that Phillips' financial interests could be affected by the decision? And that means things like, are there intervening events that are necessary before there's the possibility of a financial effect on Phillips? Could the decision that the hearing board makes ultimately on the abatement order, could it provide an opportunity to Phillips, or could it deny an opportunity to Phillips? Because if it could do either one of those things, then arguably there is a financial effect. And the only clear way to get an absolute reliable decision on this is to ask for a written opinion from the Fair Political Practices Commission. Those take quite a long time to get. In my experience, it takes like about a month to get one, at least. In the absence of that, I think, Mr. Anderson, you need to make the decision as to whether or not you think that a decision that you would participate in by the hearing board would or would not have a reasonably foreseeable financial effect on Phillips 66. I don't know if that's probably not as helpful as you might want it to be, but that's about as close as I could get looking at the statute and the regs.
I don't see how. We're neighbors. We don't have an interest in any of the, rental companies that rent ATVs. We don't, I don't see how myself or my company would either benefit or be, suffer a detriment as far as anything that happened at state parks at all, really.
With regard specifically to the abatement order, do you think that any of the provisions that make riding, say, more difficult or easier to accomplish in parts of the park could in any way affect Phillips' future interests in its refinery site or the land it owns around the refinery site?
We just don't have any really relationship with the OHV usage at the park at all. We have an outfall line that crosses the park on its way to the ocean under license from the, under permit from the Coastal Commission and license from the State Lands Commission. That's about our only, physical connection with the park other than being neighbors.
Okay. I'm correct that you are their employee, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I work for Phillips 66.
And perhaps as an employee, you might have some other financial interest in Phillips as well. I didn't know about that also, but I just wanted that to be clear on the record.
Yeah, I mean, we have a, employee stock ownership program, so yeah.
Okay, well, I think, like I said, the decision is yours to make. The only real, completely reliable decision that you could get is one from a written determination from the Fair Political Practices Commission. So perhaps at some point, I don't think there's actually going to be any decisions made today, but perhaps at some point you might request an FPPC opinion about whether or not they think there is a conflict in this situation. It would be useful for all of us if you did. I think that's it, Alyssa. Or Chairman Johnson, sorry.
If I'm still connected.
You are.
Yes, and I would make I support keeping Director Anderson on this meeting today and future ones until we have information to the contrary.
So the way I understood, Mr. Johnson, we're still trying to sort out the feedback issues, but he did say that he is in support of keeping Mr. Anderson on this meeting today.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the board's decision to make anyway. I don't think it's really Mr. Anderson. So I think that's fine.
Okay.
You know, the one thing when we look at these conflict issues, and what we're trying to do is make sure that the board is able to make a clear, defensible decision that can't be attacked for some other, you know, outstanding reason that none of us anticipate. And so I think basically the bottom line is today we're really taking information in. We're not making a decision anyway, and that's the level of participation that we would have. So. Thanks.
Is there any way we can get an IT person out to Mr. Johnson and perhaps address this audio issue while we're going through these hearings?
I imagine Mr. Johnson is in Morro Bay, so I'm not sure that we can get anyone out there per se, but I can try and have my IT person reach him on the phone again. And see if we can try and sort out. I can try and help too, but it's hard for me to take away from the board meeting at the same time. And I'm sure he doesn't want to miss the presentation. So I don't know.
I'll see what I can do, Alyssa. I might be able to help.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
It seems to me we're not dealing with someone in Hawaii. I think it's, you know, maybe a 15-20 minute car drive, and maybe they can take care of this in the next half hour.
Director Eddie, I will try to see if I can get a person to help.
Mr. Johnson, we also have sent you a couple messages on tips that you can try and use, see if that'll help alleviate your microphone issue as well. Okay. Okay, so he's gonna review those messages and then see if we can get the issue resolved.
Carl just said, can you enable screen sharing for Joan?
Yes, and hold on one second. I think it's
cheers.
Okay, so are we ready to start, John O'Brien's? John,
yeah,
take it away.
Hi,
Thanks,
Gary.
Yeah, we'll start with Sarah.
Okay, great. I'm just going to kick us off here, and hopefully everyone can hear me and it doesn't sound like I'm in a space shuttle. So good morning. My name is Sarah Miggins. Thanks for the introductions. Gary, happy to meet all of you. And I just have a few highlights to share before I introduce my colleague, John O'Brien. And on behalf of Parks, OHV Division, and our program, I just wanted to first thank those participants I see that are online today and that continue to show up and follow us. And, you know, we really value your time and your commitment and your public testimony. And myself and a few others from Parks will be staying through the end here today to hear that. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that many of us, myself, are recipient to your letters as well through email, and those are also being read. And I just want to share that although I'm not able to respond to all of those, your letters are being read. So with that, as was mentioned earlier, I am new to this position. I've been in the position, it's nearly 2 months to date. And upon my first day and meeting some of the teams there at the division, I did learn about this process. I'm not new to it, as some of you may know. I've been a commissioner with OHV for a couple years, as well as coordinating volunteers for many, many years in California, and more recently across the country, engaging volunteers in conservation related services. But in regards to our objective here today, I learned that the annual report and work plan was being submitted and reviewed by the district, and that's what brings us here today. And as you know, Parks has been committed for years in studying the particulate matter there at the dunes. And per the dust mitigation plan, on an annual basis, we need to submit these reports that John will be highlighting in a few minutes here. And again, we're committed to working with you, the district, as well as our advisors. And in addition to that, the Air Resources Board, ultimately to help be a part of improved air quality in the region. And in addition to that, we have been working with Scripps and the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And I want to share that we have been working with them for a number of years since our interest in learning about the different components of the particulate matter there. And we also, along with the contributions of the advisory group, are receiving reports from Scripps as well. So all these studies, the modeling, the investigations underway are what's being considered. And as we all know, these scientific studies take time. So ultimately, we're going to have several slides here and images to review together. And then I think following that, we'll hear from the advisory group. But I'm really pleased to introduce a colleague of mine. There's a few of us here today, and I should share that our new director, Director Armando Quintero, would have been here, but we also are hosting another commission meeting. Our Parks and Recreation Commission is meeting at the same time, or he would be here. So without further ado, I want to introduce, and many of you have already met John. He's been with us for just over a year, heads up our environmental teams, our compliance teams with the OHV division. I'm completely impressed with you, John, and happy to have you as a partner on this journey. And I guess you also carry the prestigious title of Dust Project Manager specifically to our park here. So with that, John, go for it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Good morning, I'm John O'Brien. I'm the Oceano Dust Project Manager, an amended stipulated order of abatement position. I'll be presenting today on the 2020 Oceano Annual Report and Work Plan. We've got, as Sarah alluded to, we've got a couple other people who will be available for questions as they come up. Kevin Pierce, the Acting District Superintendent, questions related to park operations and to public safety. Ronnie Glick, the resource manager at ODS VRA, he'll be available for specific questions about projects and resource management. And then you've just met Sarah, Deputy Director OHV, more executive level questions. Okay, so in 2019, there were 92.2 acres of new dust control projects at Oceano Dunes as per the amended stipulated order of abatement. These projects included the 48-acre foredune, 4.2 acres of additional back dune projects, and 40 acres of wind fencing projects. In addition, there were 15 acres of land that had been previously in other kind of dust control projects was converted to straw. It was covered with straw last year, and then 20 acres were vegetated. And that is in the Bigfoot area. I'll show that in a map next. In addition to these projects, there was ongoing monitoring and new monitoring activities were accomplished. And Dr. Jack Gillies from Desert Research Institute and the Scientific Advisory Group will discuss that further. And as I mentioned earlier, the amended stipulated order of abatement, Dust Project Manager was appointed. So just a visual representation of the park. The foredune area, hopefully you can see my cursor. I put some arrows in later. The foredune project, I think we all know where that is. That is in purple, just north of the plover enclosures. And then we've got the 20 and 15 acre projects that were put in the Bigfoot area. That is this green and then the blue. And then we've got in orange, we've got the two 20 acre wind fence arrays. And then the 4.2 acre project is this kind of bluish purple. And this is just an image of all the projects, excuse me, all the projects that have gone in to date. Again, we've got the Fordune, we've got initial stipulated order of abatement projects in red, and then some pre-stipulated order of abatement projects in pink. So all in all, there have been 230 plus acres of dust control projects have been installed. So I just want to talk a little bit about the Fordune development project. Dr. Gillies from the Scientific Advisory Group will be talking about that more. The 48 acre Fordune was developed by the SAG, the Scientific Advisory Group. It included 6 different treatment types, starting at the top, just kind of roughing up the sand, to different nodes planting, and we'll see some pictures of that, to kind of the standard parks revegetation process at the bottom, where we straw the whole thing and then plant into that. The SAG believes the Fordune planting will provide long-term sustainable dust control to the region, although initial analyses show that the projected mass emission reductions are in the 1.5 to 2% range. So we've got some pictures of the Fordune here. Here's an aerial image, and you can see the planting nodes. Basically, straw was put down in these circular patterns, and then different densities of plants were put in there. And then the parks classic is toward the bottom.
John, how large is the circle?
I'm sorry, Director Carr, can you repeat the question? One more time, I'm sorry.
Diameter of the circle.
Turn up the volume.
The diameter of the
circles.
The diameter of circles. I think they're about 12 feet, but I'm actually not exactly sure. Dr. Gillies will give more detail in his presentation. Here's a close-up of the planting area. So basically, in these circular patterns, the straw was put down, and then plants were put in at different densities within there. And we worked with work crews to do that: California Conservation Corps, American Conservation Experience, and others. And then here's a picture from last week. Again, sand is covered over most of the straw, but you can see the plants coming up from within. So in addition to the Fordune, as I talked about, there was the project at Bigfoot. You can see the middle arrow pointing to that, and then the 2 wind fence arrays. So just some additional pictures. The upper left corner, you can see the crews putting in, this is the West Bigfoot area, the 20 acre planting. And then to the bottom right, the East Bigfoot area, and that is where they last year just put straw in. Again, another image. And then here's a picture of the 4.2 acre stipulated order of abatement back dune treatment. Last year, this was fenced off and covered with straw. It'll be planted in the fall, winter of this year. Fall of this year, winter 2021. And then you can see one of the wind fence arrays up to the upper right. And then aerial photo, you can see the Fordune kind of in the bottom of the screen. Bigfoot area is up in the middle, and then at the top you can see the 4.2 acre back dune project and the wind fence arrays. Lots of pictures. So you can see this is one of the 20 acre wind fence arrays along with the 4.2 acre Fordune. Parks has been working with the Scientific Advisory Group and Desert Research Institute on the modeling requirements of the stipulated order of abatement. Slide 15 shows that the 230.9 acres, that with 230.9 acres of projects, Parks has achieved 14.7 out of 50% mass emission reduction as required by the stipulated order of abatement. These results suggest that it may be difficult for Parks to meet the 50% mass emission reduction requirement as per the stipulated order of abatement. The emission grid results from 2013 and 2019 illustrate the dynamic nature of the dune system. Areas that appeared to be more emissive in 2013 do not necessarily show equivalency of high emissivity in 2019 data based on the most recent measurements. As per the Desert Research Institute presentation on May 4th of 2020, quote, the expected benefit of targeting hotspots as identified initially in the CARB modeling has not resulted in extra emission reductions, but that map overemphasized the presence of high emission areas. Given this, from the April 22nd DRI presentation to Parks, Desert Research, DRI's emission modeling suggests that reduction in emissions is a linear relationship between area under control and emission reductions, i.e. a 30% reduction in emissive areas under control lowers mass emission by 30%. However, DRI presented the initial dispersion model results to Parks on May 4th, 2020. The dispersion model basically predicts how dust particles will disperse downwind. The model predicts that a 54% reduction in PM10 concentration at CDF will be achieved based on the current and past dust control projects implemented at Oceano Dunes SVRA. This indicates that the dust control projects at OD SVRA may be positively impacting regional air quality, even in light of the low mass emission reductions. DPR is working with DRI, Parks is working with DRI to further explore secondary and downwind effects of the projects. For the other components of the annual report, Parks continues to maintain the track out mats at Pier and Grand Avenue. This is a picture of a temporary mat just before being cleaned out. Parks is working toward permanent track out structures at both of these locations, with construction to start as early as February 2021. We're in the planning phase now. And then slide 19, obviously we can't read this. I apologize for it being kind of blurry. Illustrates the evaluation metrics Parks has been working with the SAG to complete for all projects and for the dust control program. We do the metrics annually for past and future projects. So the annual report and work plan has the metrics from the 2019 projects and then the anticipated performance evaluation for the upcoming year. The advisory group has settled on using the 10 highest model PM10 concentrations of CDF for the baseline conditions for the model, as per the stipulated order of abatement. So that's the middle column. And then there have been other studies over the past year, including a study looking at emissivity in light of the COVID closure, and then studies looking at other sources of dust. Given the Oceano closure since March of 2020 due to COVID, Parks has been working with DRI to measure the effects of the closure on dust emissivity. DRI trained the local resource conservation districts to do weekly pie swirl measurements at the locations outlined on the map. Initial results are expected by December of 2020.
What kind of measurements for those?
Excuse me, Director Carl.
How many measurements?
Oh, how many measurements have they done? Okay, it's varied depending on fog and moisture out there, but Dr. Gillies the next can answer that. My understanding is about 10 weeks of measurements, but I'm not exactly sure. So that we'll have that information in December of 2020, and Dr. Gillies can speak to that in the next when he comes up. For the 2020 work plan, which includes projects for the fall of 2020 and winter and spring of 2021, Parks will be converting different past projects to vegetation, including including 13.5 acres of past wind fencing projects, and that's at Eucalyptus and a tabletop, a lot of names. I'll have a slide up next. And then 15 acres, the 15 acres of straw at Bigfoot will be converted to vegetation as well. And also the 4.2 acre back dune project. As well, Parks will continue to maintain the 40 acres of wind fencing from 2019 and will install 90 acres of new projects in the Mesa 2 southern portion of the park. The specific areas will be determined based on operational and public safety necessity and relative emissivity, working with the SAG and the APCD. And then also, of course, there will be the ongoing monitoring and evaluation metrics. As well, Parks is working with the Scientific Advisory Group on the stipulated order of abatement requirements, and will continue to work with the APCD and CARB to revisit those. So the eucalyptus area is in this area. That's 8 acres, and then tabletop is just south of that. It was requested that we show the number of plants required for 2020. I know this is hard to read. Parks will continue. We'll be growing approximately 60,000 native plants, and approximately 33,000 are being grown by contract nurseries. And Cal Poly is growing approximately 85,000 plants. So that concludes my presentation on the 2020 Oceano Annual Report and Work Plan.
There was one section that's showing orange. It's permanent. What was that?
Can you repeat the question, Director Carr? I'm sorry.
There's one designation in your color scheme, showed orange, showed permanent. What did that mean?
Is that in this?
Did you hear what he said? Okay.
So the asking about the color scheme orange. So basically, it was just different. These are just the, this is the 20-acre wind fencing, and this is the southern 20-acre wind fencing.
Why did they as permanent?
They're permanent, yeah. Well, I mean, it's wind fencing, so it's, you know, we'll maintain them as that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions from the hearing board directors, or shall we move on to Dr. Gilley's presentation from the Scientific Advisory Group? A simple nod if you want to move on, Mr. Johnson. Okay.
Thank you.
Simple nod is good. And so I'd like to introduce Jack Gilley's. He's a very well-renowned dune geomorphologist and a member of the SAG. Jack?
Yes, good morning. Alyssa, are you going to control the?
I absolutely can, or were you wanting to share your screen? Either way, I can do it.
Go ahead, put it up on your end.
Okay. Give me 1 second here. Get it open for you. Okay. All right. There we go. There you go. Can you see it?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good morning, hearing board and members of the public and other distinguished guests. My name is Jack Gilley. I'm a research professor at the Desert Research Institute in Reno, Nevada. And I'm also part of the Science Advisory Board and will be representing the Science Advisory Group. Bill Nickling is the chair, from Professor Emeritus from the University of Guelph. Mike Bush from Cal Poly. Raleigh Martin works as in Washington, D.C. for Congress. Carla Scheidlinger works with, is a restoration ecologist, and Ian Walker is a geomorphologist at, soon to be at UC Santa Barbara. And yes, thank you. So the presentation I'm going to give will be focused on specifically, science advisory group activities, including our role in the annual report and work plan, the revegetation programs that are ongoing, the contributions, contributing measurements to the upper air, which feeds into the Desert Research Institute's modeling efforts. The largest component of the presentation will give you some information on the fore-dune restoration, and also under the suggestion of the SAG, project was instituted to look at potential other sources of PM10 that could be impacting the air quality measurements at the CDF site. Next, please. So in 2020, the Science Advisory Group was an active participant in the development of the annual report and work plan, working with parks. We gave them feedback, suggestions, and also contributions that were incorporated into the annual report and work plan prior to its submission to the APCD. And that, I'd like to recognize that under the SOA, we feel that parks fulfilled those requirements under the amended SOA for working with active consultation with the SAG during the development of the AWRP. Next slide, please. So the SAG members have expertise in a number of different scientific disciplines. Related to the revegetation program, the Science Advisory Group experts, Mike Bush, who's a botanist and an expert in horticulture, and Carla Scheidlinger, a restoration ecologist, have provided expertise on native plant seed selections and planting densities, and advised on seed germination methods for parks to aid in increasing the production of plants that will be used within the ODSBRA. And they coordinated quite a bit with Ben Wagner of Parks, and he is our on-site Parks liaison who works in the planting and seeding and monitors the plant health and growth parameters that feed into the annual report and work plan. Next slide, please. Under the guidance of Science Advisory Group member Ian Walker, who was at Arizona State University at the time, they had the ability to provide a SODAR instrument, which uses acoustic methods to measure wind speed and wind direction up between 40 feet above the ground and 60 meters above the ground. And these upper air measurements, as we call them, are an important input into the Desert Research Institute's particle dispersion model, which had been lacking in previous years, and with the expectation that this kind of information will definitely enhance the model's ability to predict the concentrations of PM10 at downwind locations. And the DRI model is an important tool for evaluating or assessing the effectiveness of the dust controls for both the mass emissions reductions and the effects on downwind PM concentrations, which are part of the metrics by which the stipulated order of abatement is assessed for its progress and success. And this instrument, the SODAR, was deployed in May 2019 and continues to the present day and will continue, we hope, as planned. Next slide, please. So one of the largest roles of the SAG in the last year has been the guidance of the fore-dune restoration project. And the fore-dune restoration is considered an important component of the dust control because fore-dunes will provide some very important functions. they roughen the surface and they slow the wind as it arrives off the ocean. With the establishment of a foredune complex, you'll slow the sand transport through them, which reduces saltation. And saltation is the physical process of the sand grains moving across the surface under the power of the wind, and by their ballistic impacts with the surface are the major release of the dust-sized particles from that surface. And then the other benefit of an established foredune will be that it will affect the erosive power of the wind on their lee side, so creating a zone of shelter on the downwind side, wherein the wind speed and saltation will also be diminished. And we think that these components of the foredune will, in the future, be an important long-term control mechanism to reduce the PM10 burden that's created within the ODS VRA by the wind-driven wind erosion. Next slide, please. So John touched on this, the 6 treatments. Treatments 1, 2, 3 were kind of a hands-off kind of approach to see how nature, without much help, would reestablish a foredune. Only native seeds were planted in test treatment areas 1, 2, and 3 with slightly different amounts of manipulation of the surface. And in test area 3, we also added into sterile ryegrass into the seeds, which would add a little bit of more support for the development of those seeds if they germinated. In treatments 4, 5, and 6, there was a much greater amount of manipulation. As Director Carr asked, the circles that were planted of straw or laid down of straw were actually 24 feet across, 12-foot radius. And into each of those circles, where in treatment 4 and treatment 5, there's a different density of circles per area of the foredune. And that was chosen to mimic the distribution of the mounds of the natural foredune areas to the south in the Oso Flaco well-established foredune area. So treatment 4 represents a lower density of mounding, and treatment 5 represents a higher density of mounding that's observed in the natural foredunes of Oso Flaco. And then within each of those straw circles, native seedlings were planted, and native seeds were sown into the circles as well. And then in treatment number 6, the park's typical method of reestablishing vegetation was adopted, where the whole entire surface was covered with straw, and into that was planted native seedlings, native seeds, and sterile ryegrass seeds to provide protection for the developing plants. And the basic purpose of all this was to determine which of these methods might lead to the shortest time to attain a mature foredune that would match those found at Oso Flaco in the shortest amount of time. Next slide, please. We are monitoring the development of the foredune restoration area using several methodological approaches. One of the chief among these is the mapping of the surface using aerial surveying, which gives us the topographic and geomorphic change, which is done using a drone that's flown by Arizona State University. So this represents the initial condition of the foredune from February to October 2019. Next slide, please. And only recently, just between October 13th and 16th last week, the Arizona State team returned to do the second large-scale mapping of the dunes, which will allow us to evaluate what change has occurred with the development, within the development of those 6 treatment areas. For evaluating topographic change, 7 flights were done by the team, with each flight lasting about 280 minutes, with a total of 7,000 and more than 7,000 photos taken that covered 1,300 acres, which extend from the foredune through to the eastern edge of the park. Another component of information that you gain from using the UAV is that you can actually map the vegetation change with the onboard sensors that are installed on the UAS. And that incorporated 4 flights, so about 120 minutes in each flight. And with that, collected over 25,000 photos, and that encompassed 700 acres of both the foredune restoration area directly and also to the east of the foredune restoration through towards the eastern boundary of the park. And these will now be evaluated for how much has changed in terms of erosion, deposition, and the percent cover of vegetation that is developing in each of the foredune treatment areas. And also helps us to start to evaluate what the downwind effects are of this change on the topography of the dunes. Next slide, please. In addition to the flights that are mapping the surface, we also have an active measurement program inside the foredune restoration area. We're measuring the sand movement through the foredune, each of the treatment areas, and also with accompanying meteorological data, which will help to aid in understanding how much sand flux, what's driving the sand flux through the restoration areas. And these measurements are used to quantify how each of the treatments are changing the sand flux and to promote the development of the plants and also the mounds, which are technically or correctly called nebkas, that form due to the plants growing and trapping the sand. Next slide, please. So from the meteorological stations that are deployed in each of the 6 treatment sites, one of the first things we looked at was what is the wind energy that's acting on each of those areas. And I think this plot shows that across the north-south extent of the foredune restoration area, all of the treatment areas were pretty much exposed to the same wind conditions. So there was nothing very different in a north-south dimension. They were all feeling the effects of the same winds. Next, please. The other thing that we're able to do is inside by each of those meteorological stations, we have a sensor that knows when the sand is being transported. And here we see for treatments 1 to 5 that it takes almost about the same wind speed, just over 6 meters per second, to get the sand moving. In treatment number 6, even by the end of August, the sensor that was still sufficiently surrounded by the straw that was put down by Parks that it was not registering any activity. But you will see that there actually was sand being transported. It just wasn't actively able to reach the sensing location. Next slide, please. And then this slide demonstrates that for the most part, the amount of hours that the wind was actually moving the sand across each of the treatment areas as defined by the sensor that registers sand movement. So it's between relatively the same amount of saltation was occurring but wasn't registered at treatment number 6 because it was too sheltered by the straw. Next slide, please. So even though the environmental conditions were pretty much similar across the north-south dimension of the fore-dune restoration, there was a really distinct change in the ability of the different treatments to actually change the sand flux that was moving across those 6 surfaces. You can see from treatment 1, 2, and 3, there was essentially no change in the amount of sand that was moving across those surfaces. And effectively, in some instances, there was more sand on the eastern side than there was, more sand flux on the eastern side than there was on the western side. But that changed dramatically for treatment areas 4, 5, and 6, where we see a reduction of almost 50% of the sand flux due to the presence of the straw and the plants and the circles. And this sort of represents over the period the amount of decrease in sand flux that was created by those different treatments 4, 5, and 6. Next slide, please. Another aspect of the ongoing studies at the ODSBRA to try and understand the dust emission system and the contributions for particulate matter that are measured, that arrive at the APCD's monitoring stations, we began a complementary study where the samples were being taken on filters to look at the relative contributions of mineral dust in proportion to other source types, combustion generated aerosols, particles that might be coming from the biogenic sources in the ocean, and agricultural sources in the vicinity. And in partnership with the APCD, the Desert Research Institute delivered samples or filter samples to the APCD, who so far to date have measured 13 dust event days, collecting samples over 24 hours. And that has happened between April and September, using a partisol filter sampler, which is the US EPA designated federal equivalent method. And those samples were taken under the auspices of the APCD technicians who are trained to use these instruments. The filter samples have now arrived at the Desert Research Institute, where they will move into the lab to be analyzed for gravimetrically to determine the mass concentration of the PM components, looking at the elements in the particulate matter from sodium to uranium using X-ray fluorescence. We'll look at the contributions of elemental and organic carbon using thermal optical reflectance methods. The ions and anions will be measured, including one called methensulfonic acid, which is representative of biogenic emissions from oceanic sources. The samples have been submitted to the Environmental Analysis Facility of the Desert Research Institute, which has a deep history in doing air quality studies across the state of California and around the world. And the data that will be come from the analysis, the speciation data as we call it, will be evaluated by SAG member Earl Withicum of the Air Resources Board, and he will likely be ably assisted by Carl Tupper of the APCD. And I think, and that concludes an update on the activities related to the science advisory group's advisory role at the for parks and the ODSBRA.
So at this time, any board members' questions of Dr. Gillies could be asked, or we can wait.
Here I have a question. Of the 13 dust events, were those the total dust events occurred?
No, there are quite a few more than 13 dust events. Those are just the ones where we were prepared to sample. So Carl will show the number of dust events coming up in his presentation as soon as we're done with these questions.
Okay.
Yes, this just represents a subsampling of the, you know, we wanted to get representative days for which dust was
Right.
coming from the ODSVRA towards the monitoring station. So it's a subsampling, hopefully representative of, it will be sufficient to define representative contributions and relative contributions from the different sources. It will also be determined following the initial analysis by Mr. Withicum and Mr. Tupper, whether it should be continued again for another year to get another selection of samples.
Thank you.
Any more board member questions that can't be held until after Carl speaks? Seeing none. Carl, why don't you go ahead and give your presentation?
Sure. Let me just get it up here. 1 second. All right. Okay, let me know if you can't see this. So my name is Carl Tupper. I'm the senior air quality scientist here with the APCD. I'd like to say good morning to our hearing board members and members of the public who are watching this. So I'm going to speak about the effects on air quality that we've seen from the dust control projects that have been implemented to date. And then I'll also go into a little bit of why we think this plan that we have from state parks is provisionally approvable. So let's just kind of get ourselves oriented here. Here's a map of the region, and I'm going to talk about some measurement sites. So we measure PM10 and PM2.5 at CDF, downwind of the dunes, and at Mesa 2, and also at Oso Flaco. And the ODSVRA is outlined here in yellow. It's about 3,600 acres of the state park. To the north of that is the Dune Preserve in orange, and riding is not allowed there. And then within the ODSVRA, riding is allowed on about 1,500 acres, and those are shown here outlined in the green dashes. So it's a smaller subset of area within the ODSVRA where riding is allowed. And so, as I mentioned, we're measuring PM10 at these 3 sites, CDF, Mesa 2, and Oso Flaco. And PM10 can be lots of different things. At these sites, we mostly see PM10, that's wind-blown dust from the Oceano dunes. But trends in PM10 are influenced by a number of things. So if we look at the levels 1 year versus a previous year versus a previous year, the levels of PM10 change a lot. And so those are influenced, of course, hopefully by the dust control projects that are out there on the dunes. That's what we're trying to do with these dust control projects is reduce the PM10 that we see downwind. But these annual trends are also influenced by meteorology. So just like some years are dry years and wet years, and some years are warm years and cold years, here we have windy years and less windy years. And as this is wind-blown dust, saltation-derived dust, all things being equal, in a windier year, you expect to have more dust than in a less windy year. And then another influence on this windblown dust, or another possible influence on this windblown dust, is the fact that for most of the year, the ODSVRA has been closed to off-highway vehicle activity because of COVID-19. And I'll talk a little bit about that and what effects, if any, that might be having on the levels we're seeing. But I'll also point out that we're measuring PM10 at these sites, and it's not just windblown dust. It is the predominant source of PM10 that we see at these sites, but there are other sources that influence these sites as well. Wildfires are a big one. In particular, this year that countywide, we've seen much greater impacts from wildfire smoke than we ever have in the past. All our previous records for PM 2.5 and PM10 have been blown out of the water, and that's true down here in South County too. So this year we have a lot of exceedances of the state standard that are not because of the dunes, but are because of wildfires, and that's pretty unusual. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, there are other sources of dust as well. About a year ago, we saw a lot of dust blown in from the San Joaquin Valley from some dust storms that were happening there. So it's a complicated picture, and what we really want to know is what is the effect of these dust control projects on the PM10 trends. And so there's a lot of competing factors, but we can use different tools to try to parse this out and figure out what effects these dust control projects are having. Obviously, lots of money is being spent, areas being removed from the riding area. So we really want to know that these projects are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I'll talk about a couple ways that we can try to parse this apart and see what the effects of these dust control projects have been. So first of all, on this graph here on the left, what I have here are the approximate acreage of dust controls within the ODS VRA by year. So in the early years, 2015, 2016, 2017, we didn't have a whole lot out there. 2018, there was a big increase in the acreage from about 50 to almost 150. 2019 was about the same. 2020, as John mentioned in his presentation, as we sit here right now, we have about 230 acres of dust controls out on the ODS VRA. And then 2021, if this plan that we have today is approved and implemented, there will be 90 more acres. So one thing we can do is say, well, how many really windy or how many really dusty hours have we had from year to year? And so what I'm going to show is a graph of the number of hours at the CDF station where PM10 is over 300 micrograms per cubic meter. And what you can see is that 2015, 2016, 2017, we had it's about 80 hours a year. But then in 2018, there was a big drop. And that kind of corresponds to the big increase in dust control acreage that we saw going from 2017 to 2018. 2019 looks about the same, which is not surprising since the areas under dust control are about the same. And then in 2020, we've had a really remarkable decrease. We have, I think, we have about 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 hours this year where PM10 at CDF is above 300. So by this line of reasoning, it does indeed look like these dust controls are having the effect that we hope they are. Now, as I mentioned, there are other influences at work here, and one of these is windiness. Maybe it's just been less windy in 2020 than it has been in previous years, and maybe that's the reason. So how can we parse that apart? So what I'm going to look at next, yeah.
Just wanted to ask, we did have a pretty good increase in the number of acres between 2019 and 2020, but it seemed like a really drastic decrease in numbers of events. Can you also, maybe you're going to get to this later, the particular type of controls that were installed that was increased from 2019 to 2020, either the type or location brought to bear on such that drastic decrease, and maybe also the less windy days?
Yeah, that's a good point, which I don't really talk about in these slides that are coming up, but it is true. It's not just how many acres of dust controls there are. It really matters where they are, and it also matters what they are. Some are much more impactful than others. So I don't really talk about that. This is what the slide that we're looking at right now is a very, very simplistic way of looking at things, and it is a much more complicated situation. But we have a number of we're looking at it from a number of different ways. This is just one way, and they all tell the same story, which is that yes, indeed, these dust controls that we're putting out there are improving air quality downwind of the dunes. And so this
Carl?
next, yeah.
You have a slide that does kind of address that a little bit, showing the relative improvements at Mesa 2 compared to the CDF site.
Yeah.
Most of the controls were put in front of the CDF site in lesser extent. And so you'll see a graph here coming up shortly that will show you that indeed a lot of these controls were placed in front of the CDF site, which previously had the highest peaks. And now we're seeing that transfer to Mesa 2, and that'll be addressed shortly.
Yep. So another way we can look at things is to look at the number of the annual number of PM10 standard exceedances. So the state, California, has a PM10 standard. It's a 24-hour average of 50. So if you exceed that level, that's an exceedance. And there's some regulatory consequences of that. So we can look at the number of exceedances from year to year. And then we can also look at the number of days each year where the wind conditions are conducive to windblown dust. And so what we define as a wind event day, and these are conditions that we determined previously before there were all these dust control measures out there, we determined that these were conditions that are conducive to windblown dust. And the specific conditions are here in the slide. There's an afternoon wind direction at CDF that's basically coming from the direction of the dunes, and wind speeds at CDF that are elevated in the early afternoon. And so this graph here just shows the number of days each year that meet that criteria. So you can see between 2015 and 2018, by this point in the year, between January 1st and October 18th, it was about the same. It was about 59 or 60 events per year. Last year was a bit less windy, and you can see a dip. There were only about 50 by this point last year. And then this year, 2020, at the end here, we actually have more than we've seen in previous years. So this is actually quite a particularly windy year. Now, if we look at the number of exceedances at CDF each year, what you can see is that 2015, 2016, 2017, we actually had a few more exceedances at CDF than we had wind events. But in 2018, we had fewer. 2019, we had even fewer. And then 2020, we have fewer still. And this is including all exceedances of the standard at CDF. But as I mentioned earlier, this year, unlike previous years, we've actually had a lot of smoke impacts. And so if we kind of take out days that were smoky and look at it, you can see, I'll do it again, you can see how the line drops out. And we also had some smoke impacts in 2017. So if we take those out, you can see how now we've had the fewest number of exceedances at CDF by this point than we have in the last 5 or 6 years, and yet we've had the most wind events. So it's been an exceptionally windy year, but we still see a marked decrease in the number of exceedances of the standard at CDF, especially after we take out exceedances that were due to fires and have nothing to do with windblown dust. So that's another line of evidence that suggests that yes, all this money we're spending, all this area that's being taken out of recreation, it is having the desired effect on improving air quality downwind, at least at CDF. So to date, these controls have been placed mostly upwind of CDF. So here's where they are, basically this square area, which I pasted from a different map, but you can see all these colored polygons. They're all basically right upwind of CDF. And to a lesser extent, upwind of Mesa 2 also, but they're mostly focused on CDF. And so as you might suspect, the improvements in air quality at Mesa 2 are a lot less than those at CDF. So on the right, I'm showing this graph I showed earlier, which is the number of hours at CDF that are over 300 micrograms per cubic meter. And now below, I'm showing that same statistic, but for Mesa 2. And so you can see in 2020, we do see the fewest number of hours of the previous years, but the jump is not quite as dramatic. And we actually, for the first time, see more hours this year at Mesa 2 that are above 300 micrograms than we see at CDF. So we've got some work to do. at Mesa 2. And here's that same graph, but for Mesa 2 now, where we're looking at the number of wind events per year, and at the same time, the number of exceedances of the standard at Mesa 2, excluding fire-related exceedances. And so you can see they track each other a lot better. At CDF, they kind of start departing where you have wind events going up and exceedances going down, but we don't see that here at Mesa 2. So we have some work to do. We've improved air quality at CDF, but seen lesser improvements at Mesa 2. So just to summarize what I've talked about so far, multiple factors affect trends in PM10 levels downwind of the dunes. The dust controls, where are they? How much do we have out there? How effective are they? Meteorology, so some years we have a higher frequency of wind events and stronger winds than other years. And then there's also impacts from non-ODSVRA sources like wildfires and dust transported from out of the county. But nonetheless, various analyses show that there are, including ones that I haven't shown here today, all of this supports the idea that we're seeing significant measurable improvements in PM10 levels, at least at CDF, and they're attributable to the dust controls that have been implemented as part of the stipulated order of abatement. And we see lesser impacts at Mesa 2. So if I could switch gears for a moment, I do want to talk about the effects of the COVID-19 OHV closure. So as everyone probably knows, in late March, the ODSVRA was closed to public vehicular access because of COVID-19. And the district has been getting a lot of questions from the media, from the public, from other agencies. What is the effect of this closure on the dust levels, on air quality? And it's important to keep in mind how dust is generated. It's not vehicles driving around kicking up dust. That's not a problem. It's definitely not their tailpipe emissions, but rather it's the long-term effects of this history of off-highway vehicle use on the surface of the dunes that generates the dust. So the vehicular activity destroys vegetation that would otherwise keep sand from moving around and keep dust from being generated. It also destabilizes some of these dune structures and makes them more emissive. So that when the wind blows, you get more dust than you probably would have if there had never been this long history of off-highway vehicle activity. So we weren't really expecting to see any major significant improvements in air quality, at least in the short term, from this closure. And in early April, our scientific advisory group wrote a letter saying exactly this. There's a bit.ly link here if anyone wants to find that letter quickly. But I'll quote the relevant part. Decades of OHV activity have fundamentally altered the natural beach dune landscape, making the dunes significantly more susceptible to PM emissions than they would be in a natural state. The SAG does not expect a few weeks or months of temporary OHV restrictions to substantially alter the balance of human versus natural contributions to PM emissions at the ODSVRA. So the SAG wasn't expecting any major effects, at least in the short term, and neither were we. And then in May and June, we actually had more exceedances of the PM10 standard than we did in the previous year. And a lot of people, we had a lot of questions about this. A lot of people were saying that maybe this suggests that it's not the riding that causes the exceedances. And so we, in late June, published a frequently asked questions about all this. And I'll quote the relevant part here, which is, there's a question, why have there been more exceedances in 2020 than by this point last year? And the answer is that in simple terms, it's been very windy. And 2020 is by far the windiest of the last 6 years, while 2019 was the least windy. And I showed that a little bit earlier in a slide for the period of January to October. But this is even more so if we just look at the beginning of the year, January through June. So we don't expect any short-term effects from the closure. And at the same time, it was a lot windier. So that's why we had more exceedances in May and June. Now it's October. The dunes have been closed to riding for more than 6 months. And now I believe we could be seeing some effects from this closure. There's some data, there's this DRI study from a few years ago, and the link is here, where and it's on our website, where they did some emissivity measurements in the snowy plover exclosure. So this is an area that for 6 months of the year is closed to riding to provide habitat for this endangered species, the snowy plover. And then for the other 6 months of the year, they take those fences down and it's open to riding. And they measured emissivity before and after that fence came down. And what they found was that it was much more emissive by a factor of about 2 or 3 when the fences came down. So this suggests that, after being closed for 6 months, this suggests that after being closed for 6 months, emissivity decreases by a factor of 2 to 3. So now we're 6 months later, we might be seeing some of these benefits to air quality from the closure. But certainly early on in April, in May, in June, we don't really expect that that temporary closure was having significant impacts on downwind air quality. So if I could shift gears first.
It's just speculative at this point. We haven't got the data back from it, but
right.
It is very quite possible based upon previous studies, but not all studies are the same. So.
Yeah, and DRI has been out there doing these, I believe, weekly pie swirl studies, emissivity studies, which Jack mentioned, and we haven't seen any of that data yet. But I'm really curious to see how emissivity evolves over the course of the spring and the summer and into the fall here. So if I could switch gears one last time, I want to talk about the APCD's provisional approval of the 2020 annual report and work plan. So we're having this public meeting. We wouldn't be having this public meeting if we didn't think that the plan was approvable, but we want to get public feedback before we make a final decision on the plan. But we do at the moment believe this is a good plan that moves us in the right direction. And so we're prepared to approve it pending this input we get today. So I want to give a little bit of history and background here. So we're here because of the stipulated order for abatement, which was finalized in April 2018. And that required a number of things, a few of which I'll highlight here. One is it required state parks to put in about 85 acres of so-called initial dust controls. It also required state parks to draft a particulate matter reduction plan, a so-called PMRP. And one of the things that PMRP was supposed to do is to come up with what we call the compliance scenario, which would achieve a 50% reduction in PM10 emissions and also achieve the state and federal PM standards. And so parks came up with a compliance scenario that, based on some modeling, showed that it would take about, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but that compliance scenario was 500 acres. So the PMRP scenario shows that for that scenario, it will take 500 acres of dust controls to meet this target of a 50% reduction in PM10 emissions. And then another thing in the stipulated order for abatement was that every year parks would have to come up with this annual report and work plan to implement the PMRP. So the PMRP is sort of the broad overarching structure, and then the annual reports and work plans are kind of like progress reports on, the implementation of that plan. What did we do last year? How did it work out? And what do we plan for the next year? Okay. So as I mentioned, parks submitted a PMRP, and that PMRP contained a scenario which showed that about 500 acres of dust controls would be needed to meet this initial target. And then in 2019, about a year ago, we modified that stipulated order for abatement, and then some history of dust control acreage. So there were about 140 acres at the end of 2019 after they implemented these initial dust controls. 2019, there was no net increase in acreage. There was actually a small loss of acreage. But now, as we sit here today, there's about 230 acres of dust controls out there. So, and here's a map of where those dust controls are right now. So as I mentioned, right now, as we sit here, we've got 230 acres of dust controls. The approved PMRP has a 500-acre compliance scenario. So we really want to see parks making progress on that goal. Okay, So they've got 3 years to complete an additional 270 acres. And so you do the math, and that comes out to 90 acres per year, okay? And so that's why we suggested to Parks that they put 90 acres of new dust controls in there. And that's why we believe we can provisionally approve the plan. Now, this 500-acre compliance scenario, that's based on a model. That model is being refined. And so once those refinements are done, we might find out that, hey, it's not 500 acres. Maybe it's more than that, or maybe it's less than that. And we have good reason to believe that it will probably be less than that once these improvements to the model are made. But in the meantime, the approved model, the only scenario we have in front of us is this 500-acre compliance scenario. So until we have a different target, we want to continue to make steady progress towards that 500 acres and thus the 90 acres that have been proposed for this year. So that's why we believe it's provisionally approvable. And it's going to shift the focus towards Mesa 2. As I mentioned earlier, we've seen some dramatic improvements at CDF, but less so at Mesa 2. So we definitely like to see the focus shifting now to Mesa 2 and to try to provide some air quality benefits for the folks down there. So some caveats. Yes, we think we can approve the plan, but that doesn't mean that we agree with everything that's in there. So some questions. So these 90 new acres are not actually defined in the annual report and work plan, but rather the report says, we're going to figure these out in the next few weeks. And we're okay with that because we're trying to get some more information. We're trying to do some more modeling to really figure out, or I say we, but really state parks and the SAG are trying to do some more modeling to figure out the best place to put those. And so from my perspective, I would rather get them in the right place, even if it means we don't know exactly where they're going to go right now, than to approve something than to know right now simply for the sake of being able to draw a map. Okay. The final locations are going to be subject to review of the SAG and approval of the air pollution control officer. So we still have, we still have to approve where they're going to go. And our final approval letter will likely include some deadlines. So we need to know where they're going to go by a certain date. I believe the annual report and work plan suggests November 16th or 18th. So we'll probably codify that in our final approval letter. Another issue is that the 90 new acres are described as temporary. And I want to address that by saying, we really need, the compliance scenario is 500 acres of dust controls during the windy season. Now, from the district's perspective, we think in the long run, it's going to be cheaper and more effective and just better all around to have 500 acres of permanent controls. But we want to provide flexibility. And if State Parks wants to put up hundreds of acres of temporary controls in the spring and then pull them all down in the fall, only to put them all back up again in the spring, that's really up to them. We would advise against it, but we want to give them some flexibility in their operations. And so if they think that's the best way to do it, we're not going to stand in the way of that. And then finally, as I started to say earlier, we think we can approve this annual report and work plan, but that doesn't mean that we agree or endorse everything in it. So as we described in our comment letter on the third draft, there's a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily agree with. For example, this language, which still appears in the draft that we have, the final draft, is that the foremost goal is to achieve reductions in PM10 concentrations towards attaining state and federal air quality standards while minimizing impacts to public recreation opportunities. We don't agree with that. The goal is not to make progress toward attaining standards. The goal is to attain those standards. And at least from the district's perspective, we're not concerned about impacts on public recreation. It's certainly not a goal of ours to minimize those impacts. We're sort of agnostic about impacts. And there are other things in here which I won't go into, but you can read about in our comment letter. So we don't endorse all these statements, but what we do endorse is the plan. Where the rubber hits the road. What is State Parks planning to do in 2020 and 2021 to address the dust issue. So we had lots of feedback in our comment letter about on the ground changes that will affect air quality. Things like 90 acres of new controls, the timing of removing some fences and things like that. And all of those were incorporated into this final draft. And for those reasons, we believe that we can approve it. So that's all I have to say. Here's my contact info. I'll obviously be here for the rest of the day for questions, but you can also reach me at the email address. And I'll say there's a lot of materials on our website. I've given the full address here, and I've also made a bit.ly link so people can just go right there. And then specifically related to the hearing board, there's this other web page on our website that where people can find all these documents. And that's about it. So
I'd like to add one thing, Carl. Good job. We are concerned with the recreational impact, but we can't put it in front of air quality. So that's our recreational impact, our economic impact are all concerns. However, our overriding concern is air quality. So that's we can't say that we can't do it because it hurts recreation. We have to do the air quality thing, but we can say we're working with state parks to minimize the effects on recreation. So that being said, be happy to answer questions. The panelists from the board of directors, the hearing board of directors, and then the public will have a chance to comment after that. Chair, it's yours.
I have a question. Can you hear me, Gary?
Yes, Director Johnson should be directing the as chair.
Mr. Johnson, you need to unmute yourself on your phone. There you go.
You can recognize the by raising your hand. Chair Johnson will.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Technology is a wonderful thing, except for when it doesn't.
Persistence is key.
Dr. Lapidus had some questions. We'll open the floor to anything you'd like to ask.
You're muted, Dr. Lapidus.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we sure can.
So I just have a question about the exceedances and how that correlates with the emissions reduction, the emissive reductions of a particulate matter. It seems like although things look like they're improving, we're still on track for somewhere between 50 and 60 exceedances this year, discounting the effects of the forest fires. And the initial stipulated order of abatement talks about reducing emissions by 50% over this period of time. And do we have a sense of how that might translate into the number of exceedances that we might expect per year? We started off with about, on average, 70 exceedances per year, at CDF at least. We're looking now at about probably 60-ish or so this year from calculations based on what Carl just told us, irrespective of the fires. So I'm wondering where we are with emissions relative to the number of exceedances. And if we were to attain the 50% reduction, what would we expect, how would we expect that to translate into the number of exceedances we'd still be seeing?
Carl?
I can answer that. So that 50% goal in mass emissions comes from looking at Oso Flaco, which is an air quality site that's downwind of the ODSC, downwind of the Oceano Dunes, but downwind of a non-riding area. And I showed that map earlier in my presentation. And saying how many exceedances did we see at Oso Flaco in a year versus how many do we see at CDF. And what we determined is that if for the 2 years where we had data at the time when we were doing this analysis, if we had reduced concentrations at CDF by 50%, then we would have the same number of exceedances at CDF as we saw at Oso Flaco. And so, the idea being, wherever you have a beach, you're going to have, and you have high winds, you're going to generate dust. And so we've always acknowledged there's a natural component to the dust issue. And even if there had never been this long history of riding, we would probably still see occasional exceedances of the PM10 standard at CDF. And so Oso Flaco is sort of roughly supposed to kind of characterize that. And so so that 50% target was, as I mentioned, we came up with that by saying, well, how far would we have to reduce concentrations at CDF to make the same number of exceedances at CDF as we see at Oso Flaco? So, so to answer your question, if we reach that, this is a very rough calculation, obviously, but if we reach that goal of cutting emissions across the park by 50%, then we would anticipate that the annual number of exceedances at CDF would be the same as we see at Oso Flaco. So in a windy year, we see more exceedances at Oso Flaco than we do in a non-windy year. But I think in Oso Flaco, we've seen anywhere from just a handful to maybe about 20 exceedances on a really windy year. So that's kind of the range of what we hope to see at CDF. And as I mentioned, it does still depend upon these other factors like how windy it is.
And maybe I missed this, but where are we in terms of reduction of emissions right now from baseline?
John and Jack, I think, mentioned this, but it was about 15%.
Any other questions for the?
This is Bill Johnson. For Ms. Miggins, I have a question. Can you hear me? Okay, it was just mentioned about OHV putting in another 90 acres and coming up with a plan actually formalizing that by November 16th. Is that something you believe that you can commit to here today?
I think we already committed to that. Is that accurate, John? You're muted.
That's right. We're confident we're going to get it done, but by December to get something approvable done by then. So.
Okay, thank you.
Are we ready to move to public comment? Mr. Carr has a question. You're muted, Bob. There you go.
Okay. Is that sonar equipment located at one site only?
Say that again?
The sonar equipment.
The sonar equipment is located at one site only. And Jack would have the answer to that, Dr. Gillies.
Yes, the SODAR, there's only one SODAR, but we've positioned it to give us a good coverage of the upper air wind. It covers an arc of the sky, let's say, that we've never had before to use as input into the model that creates the wind field. Previous to this time, we've had to rely on upper air measurements from the Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Where's the sonar located?
It's located to the west of the Phillips 66, plant, okay. Generally speaking.
Thank you. One more question. Was study consultant regarding the reopening of the dunes for day use?
I didn't get that.
One more time, Bob.
Was the site consulted regarding the reopening of the dunes For day use only.
Was the
No.
SAG consulted for the reopening?
No, that's not our purview.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, are you ready to open it to public comment?
Yes, if there's no other comments by the board members, we'll go to public comment, and speakers will have 2 minutes to express their opinions.
We're gonna.
Yes, sir.
This is where we need to administer the oath, Alyssa, before we start taking.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to administer the oath for any members of the public that wish to speak. When I administer the oath, I'm going to ask that when it's your time to speak, you state your first and last name and that you accept or that you provide the oath. We need the verbal administer of the oath when you speak. So the oath is, do you solemnly state under penalty of perjury that the evidence that you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So again, I reiterate, when you're up to speak, please state your first and last name and that you provide the oath or give the oath, and then you can have your 2 minutes to speak. I also wanted to recover that if you are on the phone, I will be calling you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. And to raise your hand to speak, if you're on the phone, you need to hit *9. If you're on the webinar, you can use the software to raise your hand virtually. I see several people have done so already, but I want to give everybody the opportunity to raise your hand if you would like to speak. Was there anything else before we get started?
I just wanted to say, as an example, I would say, I'm Tim McNulty. I took the oath. Here's my testimony. So.
Thank you, Mr. McNulty. Okay. All right, the first speaker is going to be Ron Perry. You may unmute yourself and please state your first and last name and that you give the oath.
Good morning. My name is Ron Perry and I take the oath.
Thank you.
I come from engineering and program management background, and so I have a couple questions. Maybe some are more opinion, but some are technical. I want to know where can I find the model? Is it a Monte Carlo simulation? I mean, what exactly is the model that you're using for the PM10 abatement? Why isn't the composition of the PM10 a bigger factor than the PM10 incidence itself? Like, what exactly is it would be more my concern of toxicity versus the actual count? And then I noticed that the top of the map, there's a non-OHV area. Is there a monitoring station there as a baseline? Now, I know you talk about on the southern side, there's a monitoring station in a non-OHV writing area. So I would think that you'd want maybe 2 data points to baseline. Another comment was that the SAG is agnostic. And to me, this should be all a collaboration. And I feel like making that kind of a statement, maybe it's purely science-based that you need to report on, but to me, this all needs to be a collaboration. And what I've seen so far with the different departments, CCC and the parks, is that it seems to be very dysfunctional. And I'm hoping that, maybe there's new members and that we get together and have some collaboration and mutual agreement that this is not just about PM10. Of course, we all want to be good stewards for the environment, but we all have a stake in this. Okay, so then my last comment is the reopening phases of the OHVRA seem to not have any metrics to gauge success, and so are kind of intentionally unattainable. All right, that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Okay. The next speaker is Rochelle. Please state your first and last name and that you give the oath.
Hello, Rochelle Tody. I accept the oath. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Oh, you can't hear me?
No, we can hear you.
Oh, the counter is not going, so I thought.
I haven't started it yet. I was giving you the
sorry.
opportunity to say your name.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the annual report and work plan. And I really like the presentation by Dr. Gillies, and I'm impressed with the scientific research and technology that's being applied to this air quality problem. I'm a co-founder of the Concerned Citizens for Clean Air, and we've been working on this for 10 years. And so I am glad that Mr. Tupper explained the 90 acres over the next 3 years to reach the 500-acre target. And I also agree with the goal of reaching the state standard for the emissions. I am concerned with the temporary designation on the 90 acres, and I would ask, how do we know that the OHV division, after the SOA is complete, wouldn't simply remove that mitigation at a later date? We also need to stop targeting the CDF monitor and expand the mitigation to cover the whole mesa and prevent the pollution from getting to all of the people. And lastly, despite the best efforts, again, we're running out of time for planting, and we need to do better next year because now it's going to be mid-November before this is approved. Thank you so much. That's all.
Thanks, Rochelle. Thank you. Okay. The next speaker is Chris Sorensen, and following Chris is going to be April Moulton.
My name is Chris Sorensen. I accept the oath. I am happy to see that the plan is being driven by a goal, at least for now, of 500 acres. But I am concerned that I haven't heard very much discussion or presentation today on the effectiveness of the measures that are being installed. Two things, you know, that wind fencing has a different effectiveness of other measures like vegetation. It may be fine in the aggregate in the overall plan, but how does it play out in terms of achieving the overall emission reductions? Also, I noticed that the plan, I think, doesn't do much to change what's going on in the Fore Dune area in the short term anyway, in terms of selecting one of the different plots as the principal way of going forward. But I'd like to say, you know, Dr. Gillies pointed out that there seems to be a really dramatic difference between the northern end and the southern end of that Fore Dune area. And it would seem to make sense to make an early decision to go ahead and go forward with the more effective controls there, the more effective vegetation practice. So I'd like to see the whole program push forward more aggressively toward the most effective controls. I think this is the benefit of the writing as well, because if you can achieve more effectiveness with fewer acres, everybody benefits. That's my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay. The next speaker is April Moulton, followed by David Jett.
Good morning. I am April Moulton, and I accept the oath.
Thank you.
I do not really understand why the most recent report by Scripps Institute completed this year is not really taken into serious consideration by both the state parks and APCD. It shows that the previous studies had false information, and sand blows inland. This is a beach community. I'm a local realtor and a resident of Oceano, and I live in the closest neighborhood to the entrance on the southern entrance to the dunes. We bought a home in that neighborhood for the specific reason of being able to recreate and drive on the sand dunes. If anyone could complain about sand intrusion into their neighborhood, it would be us. But you know what? We bought a beach house where the sand blows, and we understand that it requires regular street sweeping to keep the sand off the roads. yes, even this year, since nobody has been driving on the dunes, the sand is still carried inland. It's natural, it's wind. It really makes me sick to think that paired with the terrible orange fencing, people want to plant non-native plants in the dunes. If you are truly concerned about the sand blowing into AG and Napomo areas, I encourage you to meet with the wind fence professionals, WeatherSolve. They have already built and proven their technology works. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, April. Okay. Next up is David Jett, followed by Off-Riders United.
Hello, this is David Jett, and I accept the oath.
Thank you.
So first off, my biggest thing is we entered into this 50% dust mediation or whatever, and we haven't actually studied how much dust there actually is in the first place. You guys say there is, but then it always changes. The other thing is I find it ridiculous that we're spending so much money on such a natural occurrence instead of spending money on things such as homeless problems, mental health issues. There's so much more important things that we could be spending money on, real actual issues. Every time I hear these scientists, talk about all this dust moving and we're mitigating it by planting native species. Well, all right, number one, how can you plant native species on a dune system? If there were plants on there wouldn't have been no dune system in the first place. So that doesn't make sense at all. And then they say things like, oh, well, we're planting these native species, but then we have to plant these other species and we have to manipulate. How does that make any sense that you're putting those two together? You're saying native and then manipulating that. You're counteracting everything that you're doing. If you guys really want an effective thing to happen, talk to WeatherSolve. You guys immediately threw that out. That the scientists, you guys are they're trying to fix it to make it fit their narrative. So there's a proven way to get it to achieve what you guys are trying to achieve with no net loss. And then you guys, you just threw that out, not even trying it, but you're trying all these other things. You're definitely trying to take more and more riding areas away. There's so many dunes outside the riding area that if you really wanted to try things, you could put that stuff there. But no, it's discrimination at its best. That's all that it is. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay. Next up is Off-Riders United. Following them is Thomas Roth.
My name is Danny Hensley with Off-Roaders United. I accept the oath.
Thank you.
So the SAG has been going at this for years, and they've been spending millions of dollars each year, and they're not coming up with anything. The only thing they ever really seem to know for sure is that science from anywhere else will not work. Out of Ron Glick's mouth, oh, those guys from Canada, yeah, you can't really believe anything they say. That is a quote. I have it on video from Ron Glick. So they've been wasting all this money. The Scripps Institute comes out with a report that basically says they were manipulating info. So either they were incompetent and they didn't know they were doing it, or they're criminally corrupt. They have been wasting millions for years and years. The only thing they really seem to think is, well, if we just keep restricting off-roading, we'll be able to get to that number. So WeatherSolve Wind Fence, I did a search and I came up with WeatherSolve Wind Fence. They can reduce the dust by 80%, the PM10 by up to 65%. This is a $4 million cost to build this wind fence that will cut down this dust. And that's we don't have to do any maintenance on it for up to 10 years. Right now, you are spending $2 million a year. This year, I guarantee you spent more than that. So WeatherSolve Wind Fence will fix the problem. Doesn't matter Who's to blame? Why are you guys not willing to look into this? Why do you keep kicking it down the road? Why are we not making this our first priority? Something that can actually fix this. We can open the park back up. I will tell you why. Because the APCD does not want to fix the air. You are wanting to restrict and get rid of off-roading. And that is your objective. It is political bias. Thank you.
Okay. Next to speak is Thomas Roth, followed by Casey Thorne. Tom Roth, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Good morning. This is Tom Roth. I'm the attorney for Friends of Oceana Dunes, and I accept the oath.
Thank you.
The Air Pollution Control Officer and the APCD should not approve State Park's annual dust control plan under the stipulated order of abatement for one simple reason. The stipulated order of abatement and its implementing actions are unlawful. Why? Number one, no government agency in the state has the authority to issue abatement orders for a nuisance that is caused by natural conditions. State law also says that even if some portion of the emissions are man-made, a combination of man-made and natural conditions, as staff has admitted, is conclusively presumed to be a natural emission under the law, and there is no nuisance liability for natural emissions. We know from many sources of data now, including the Scripps study and staff's own studies, that a large portion of the emissions, if not the majority of the emissions, are natural emissions from sand blowing in the wind. Now, the only exception that allows an abatement order for a nuisance caused by natural conditions is if the landowner is negligent. But State Parks, as the landowner and operator here, has not been negligent. And in fact, it has spent some $15 million trying to address these natural dust conditions for 10 years. But we've seen this year that even closing down the park doesn't do the trick. It's time to stop wasting OHV funds and admit this is a natural condition that will not be stopped by limiting or even ending all OHV at this park. Adding more dust control as requested by State Parks will not resolve the situation, nor will closing the SVRA. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to speak is Casey Thorne, followed by Amar Pawar.
Good morning. My name is Casey Thorne, and I accept the oath. Today, my message is for California State Parks. As a firm believer in education and an advocate for objective science, I find myself increasingly confused by your stance on this matter. You've been provided the scientific findings that would allow you to take a solid pro-OHV stance on the issue, and yet you continue to make unnecessary concessions. The more I educate myself on this issue, the organizations and the interests involved, the less I'm able to understand your position. I cannot help but question the underlying motivations and intents of those in decision-making authority. In closing, I choose to believe in the future of our OHV community with a faith born not of words, but of deeds. I am here today to ask you to take a direct action that supports the future of OHV at Oceano Dunes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next to speak is Amar Pawar, and after that is Arlene.
Hi, this is Amar Pawar, and I take the oath. Okay, so I've been logging into quite a few of these meetings and kind of seeing how things are going. And it's really disturbing that a lot of the board members feel that the recreational part of it is not that important. You know, yes, I understand the fact that each one of us recreates differently. You know, we all have our hobbies, but there's a big percent of the population that loves to go to these dunes. It's been a family tradition since the 70s when there was nothing around. And then the builders decided to build houses around this area. And all of a sudden, the off-roaders were the problem. And it's really, again, it's really difficult to understand basic human tendencies that somebody comes in down the road and then you try to stop the people that have been doing this for generations. So I really request the APCD to think about this, not let their personal opinions about off-roading or whatever recreational options there are bias their findings. And even the scientists, I also have background in science, and it's not right. Do the right thing, portray the correct numbers and the studies, and let the facts out. We all know that off-roading in the dunes doesn't contribute to any additional sand or PM10 particulate matter emission. And so I think that needs to get out and let everybody enjoy their hobbies and have a good time. And it's for all of our well-being, mental and physical well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next up is Arlene, followed by Jared McLeod.
Hello, this is Arlene Versov, Concerned Citizens for Clean Air, and I accept the oath.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I will be brief. A plan, according to the dictionary, is a detailed proposal for doing or achieving something, and it includes a list of steps that talk about the timing and the resources. Note the use of the word detailed. The ARWP in its current form has more holes than Swiss cheese. It is an outline, not a plan by definition. I was going to run through the glaring deficiencies in the plan as it exists, but Carl Tupper's great presentation today addressed most of them. So I just am going to close by urging you to approve the plan only after the specific 98 acres are identified, specific permanent mitigation is identified, and the mileage deadlines for getting the work done are identified. And with that, I'll close, but thank you for your work in this regard. We look forward to a real plan.
Thank you, Arlene. Okay. Next up is Jared McLeod, followed by Michael Normoyle.
Hello, my name is Jared McLeod. I'm Vice President of Friends of Oceano Dunes, and I accept the oath. In September, the Scripps Institute of Oceanography released its 2020 analysis of airborne particulate samples collected at and around Oceano Dunes. The report raised some serious questions about the contribution of dust. Scripps determined mineral dust on average on high PM days accounts for only 20% of the overall mass of the PM 2.5 measured by the APCD BAM at CDF. And on lower PM days, the mineral dust mass is lower still. Scripps also determined that the SAG's PM data has been including other types of biological matter, organic compounds, salt, and water, therefore explaining the total inaccuracy of SAG's work thus far. Scripps also said, it is worth noting that there is no evidence that toxic compounds are associated with the two major PM 2.5 sources during windy days at Oceano Dunes. The APCD's dust particulate myth of toxins causing health effects is just one more lie disproven. For years, the APCD lied about silica coming from the dunes and causing deadly silicosis. This has been disproven. The APCD has argued for years that there is crust on the dunes and OHV causes the dust. This myth has been disproven. And we've had the most violations of PM10 standard without OHV recreation that we've had in the previous 6 years, since March. The APCD has continually lied about data collection, such as double counting months, later corrected. Once again, the APCD misleads the public, lies and twists around the data, and they're never ending war against the families who recreate at Oceano Dunes. While the APCD and APCO Gary Wiley are serving as the #1 economy killer to our area. SAG failed to properly model the 48-acre foredunes in violation to your own stipulated order of abatement. State parks and OHVMR should be withdrawing from the stipulated order of abatement. It has now been proven to be based on the APCD's false claims, scare tactics, lies, misleading science, and manipulation of data. The park should not be offering concessions with this new 90-acre closure, but it should instead be opening the 48-acre closure back up to OHV immediately. And now there's talk, State Parks is talking about using this soil cement to solidify the surface of the soil. It appears that this environmental justice is very selective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Okay, next up is Michael Normoyle, followed by the caller with last 4 digits 7129. Oh, Michael Normoyle just disappeared. Okay, so we're gonna go with caller with the, oh, there he, maybe not. Going with the person with the last 4 digits of 7129.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you please state your first and last name and accept the oath, please?
Yes. My name is James Shaw, and I do accept the oath and promise to tell the truth. First, I want to comment on some of the reports from this morning. On table 2-2, page 15 of the work plan, it shows a 14% reduction in the spring of 2020, but then later you state 54% reduction on page 15. And also that 14% reduction is only 3% from the prior year. And then further, you state there's been more PM10 exceedances all throughout the year. So these data occurrences are really not aligning. Next, Carl Tupper showed a graph of over 300 hours, and I believe Gary Wiley had that same graph on the news that in 2020 there was now no exceedances over 300 hours. What is the actual level? If the other years were at 301 and 2020 is at 299, it looks like it's a 0 and a drastic reduction. I think that graph is extremely misleading if you're not showing the actual data. And as Mr. Tupper stated, it is extremely simplistic. Mr. Tupper's next slide showed that the target for the 24-hour average is 50 micrograms per cubic meter. He also referenced the PMRP. Please look at your own table 4-2 of the June 2019 PMRP. It shows the 24-hour average from May 1st to August 1st of 2013 was measured, not modeled, but actually measured at 51 micrograms per cubic meter. So we're going through a lot of trouble and a lot of effort and a lot of money when the measured data already shows that in an active sand dune, we are only 1 microgram per cubic meter above the state target. I think this needs to be addressed immediately. He also stated that vehicles do not kick up dust from emissions. Thank you for that. I will recognize that vehicle use will prevent some vegetation growth, but this is in a state OHV park. We should not expect that every inch of California coastline be returned to natural. Otherwise, you should start removing homes and businesses all over the state, and that would be ridiculous, just like it is ridiculous to shut down an existing state park. Air quality is certainly important, but as I stated this morning in my general public comments, there has never been any health data that shows the residents of Nipomo are experiencing any other health concerns in a naturally occurring beach environment. Please keep this state park open. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to go back to Michael Normoyle for his comments, and then followed by Michael is going to be caller with the last 4 digits, 4370.
Good morning. This is Mike Normoyle, and I do accept the oath. I've submitted written comments on 2 subjects, and I'd like to focus my comments here on just one of those topics, and that takes us back to what Mr. McNulty was speaking about earlier in the workshop regarding the participation of Mr. Anderson. I think we would all agree that the most paramount thing for the process is to maintain the integrity of the board's deliberations and its decision making. This is particularly important in light of material posted on the website, which indicates, to me at least, that it looks like Friends of Oceano Dunes is ready to mount a legal assault on the implementation of the SOA and the SOA itself. I respectfully disagree with some of the comments made by both Mr. Anderson and Mr. McNulty, but in this regard. First, I think from public documentations, it's clear that there's more than just a neighborhood relationship between Phillips 66 and the ODSVARA. Since 1980, there has been a 600-acre agreement and grant of development rights. There is a recorded dedication of vertical easement from 101 to the park. On September 24th, at the OHMVR Commission meeting, State Parks indicated that they were going to try to seek to obtain property from Phillips 66 pending its closure. With regard to, there's also the issue of contributing sources and whether or not Phillips 66 might be a contributing source to the pollutants. With regard to Mr. McNulty's comments, I respect him greatly, but I do think, given all that's at stake, that this is more than just a decision for Mr. Anderson. I do believe Mr. Anderson should seek on his own proper advice and counsel with respect to this issue. But in the absence of that, I think you should also get a written opinion from Mr. McNulty. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, shoot. Okay, now we're going to have caller with last four digits 4370, followed by them will be Amy Granite.
Morning. This is Leah Rigo. Good morning. This is Leah Rigo Hensley, and I accept the oath.
Thank you.
I'm a local to the Oceano. Okay, thank you. I'm a local to the Oceano area and the executive director for Off-Roaders United. Off-Roaders United is an environmentally conscious nonprofit that focuses on keeping all off-roading areas open and clean. Today, I'll be reading from page 2 of the 39-page report that Weathersall Wind Fence put together and submitted to the APCD, California Coastal Commission, and State Parks. It's page 2, 1.2, Wind Fence Methodology. Weathersall has installed wind fences on all 7 continents around the world. The uses have varied widely from soil erosion control at coastal stockyards to wind speed mitigation on rocket launch pads, but the goal has always remained the same: provide effective relief from the disruptive forces of wind. A well-designed wind fence is one that provides wind speed reduction on a daily basis. The Weathersall wind fence system uses a series of finely woven polypropylene fabric panels to disrupt wind movement and thereby dampen its propulsive force. The panels are clipped onto horizontal galvanized steel cables to transfer the load from the fabric to the fence poles. To minimize the wear on the fabric, the fence is arranged so that the fabric is either locked to the pole or clipped to the cable. There are no other connection points or wear points. Pole and foundation options for a Weathersall wind fence are numerous and are custom designed based on the unique environmental conditions of each individual project site. We don't need to hear the biased opinions of anti-OHV scientists. Let's listen to the true non-biased scientists that spend every day studying and solving extreme wind conditions. Please contact Weathersall Wind Fence. And if you'd like to read the report, you can go to offroadersunited.org and click on the Weathersall Wind Fence link. Thank you and have a great day.
You're muted. Alyssa.
Sorry about that. The next speaker is Amy Granite, followed by Amy will be Dorothy.
My name is Amy Granite, and I accept the oath. I represent the Corva, California Off-Road Vehicle Association. This issue is very upsetting to many on twofold. On behalf of APCD and state parks, the fuzzy science that is presented today have used a lot of words that I'm not sure people picked up on, like hypothesis, assumption, extrapolation. It all adds up to the fact that the APCD has found a convenient scapegoat in Oceano Dunes SVRA, rather than really look at the true issues of the construction in Nipomo Mesa and the fact that those houses were built in an area that had long been considered too windy for development. They've also engaged in a vilification of the off-road community, people like me and people like my family and my children, which is unacceptable on behalf of a public agency. State Parks has abandoned the off-road community. And they should think very carefully about any closures, any subsequent closures that have evidently been agreed to, because the experience of an SVRA is based on the enjoyment of the people. And once you have destroyed the enjoyment of the enthusiasts, it no longer becomes an SVRA in essence. And then it's no longer an SVRA. Some people might be happy, but they don't realize all the money that is funding all these unnecessary projects goes away. So be very careful and really rethink your oath of service to the California residents, to California citizens, and to the off-road community. This is very, very disappointing, everything that we've heard today. And we will respond appropriately when needed and legally. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next speaker is Dorothy, and followed by Dorothy will be Jennifer Andrade.
Hello, my name is Dorothy Hines, and I'd like to thank you very much for your presentations today. They have been quite informative, and I would like to submit that the approval letter that will be done by November the 16th, that it clearly spells out.
Ms. Hines, before you give your public comment, can you please accept the oath that I gave earlier?
I apologize for that.
No worries.
I'll start over. I'm Dorothy Hines, and I do accept the oath. Thank you for that. I do want to thank you for the comprehensive presentations that you've given today. They have been quite informative, and I would like to encourage that the approval letter on November the 16th, by the 16th, that it includes all of the details that are missing in the current plan. As was previously mentioned, details are very, very important, and that would include locations for the mitigation, and also I'd like to encourage that the highest impact mitigations be used, such as was demonstrated in that the T6 area. Also, that the mitigation be sustainable in the future and that they not be temporary. Also, I'm pleased to see that Mesa 2 will get attention, and I'll be looking forward to see the level of detail for Mesa 2 that the CDF has gotten. That is very, very important as the mitigation continues. And I'd like to also thank you for being totally mindful that the air pollution is the issue and not single source recreation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Last speaker that I have is Jennifer Andrade.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Andrade, and I'm speaking as an individual, and I accept the oath. I would like to, first of all, bring to the point that you heard the word seeding, manipulation. This course of trying to manipulate our natural landscapes by putting in non-native vegetation and ultimately hurting our landscapes is something that we really need to look at, because in Oregon, they attempted to do the same thing, and they are now taking out the vegetation that they've put in. I think that we really need to look at the SAG's report, and where he had said it is not the goal to allow for public recreation. So really, it's not their goal to ensure that they are maintaining the area for OHV at all. Rather, their focus is more purely on a biased standpoint. My questioning would be to them is whether or not do they actually go out to go meet with WeatherSolve wind fences? Have they gone and seen a WeatherSolve wind fence? Have they looked at the data from the numerous places to determine whether or not it truly will work? Instead, we're spending so much money, so much wasted money going and putting up orange fencing and bringing out different problems that are just exacerbating the issue. We need to make sure that we're asking the right questions and that we're bringing in more than just one person, more than one group who knows what they're talking about. It's super frustrating that You have no problem with disallowing the public recreation, but yet they have no problem utilizing the OHV fund and using the money that's in there. When we are no longer allowed to be on the beach, what funds are they going to be using? Because there's no other option. So please bring back the dunes for OHV.
Okay. I do have another speaker. Gina is the last speaker that I have now.
Hi, my name is Gina McMahon and I accept the oath. I am a resident 5 generations in our area. I have seen the impact and know the impact that it will take on our community financially in this small town if we do not continue and be allowed to have recreation on our beach. I know that they think that this is just people out on their quads riding in the dunes, but it also has an effect on the senior and the disabled public. My dad is a disabled vet and uses the beach just to drive down there. If you put us in that category with everybody not having the right to drive on the beach, that will affect people that cannot access the beach without a vehicle, which are the disabled and handicapped population, the elderly population. It has been proven that the air quality is affected by a natural occurrence. I am just getting into this fight that has been going on for years, and it has been proven, I believe, that this last proof was that the natural occurrence of Mother Nature is what's doing this. I want to do more research and I want to continue to support our locals and our town in keeping this open. Also, I do not believe myself as messing with Mother Nature, putting chemicals into our soil. How is that going to affect our environment later on down the line, putting unnatural growth into our area? I thank you very much. This is all my research and opinion, and I thank you so much, and I hope that you support the locals, their businesses, and the money that we use to keep our town alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Okay. I don't have any other members of the public that wish to speak. Chairperson Johnson, would you like to close public comment and bring it back to the board?
Okay, at this time, we'll close public comment. I do believe a question has come up in regards to disclosure of any ex parte communication. If I can turn that over to Mr. McNulty, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was pointed out to me by Mr. Anderson, something that I was remiss in not mentioning at the beginning of the testimony here on this item. And that is because this is a hearing where we're considering the abatement order, all the members of the board who have had ex parte contacts outside of this meeting at any time since the last meeting should try to make an attempt to disclose those contacts and the content briefly of what they were. And I appreciate very much being reminded of that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to mention that I have disclosure of ex parte communications.
Okay.
So I met with Gary Willie and Dora Drexler and Carl Tupper of the Air Pollution Control District about 2 weeks ago by Zoom meeting, mainly just to discuss getting me up to speed on the current situation and issues surrounding the issue on the Oceano Dunes, and basically just preparing me to be prepared for this meeting.
Do any other board members have similar ex parte communications they wish to disclose?
I had a couple general conversations with Gary, basically just about the status over the I don't know, over the last 7 or 8 months, just in passing, more just seeing him in social situations. And I had a very brief conversation about today's hearing with Mr. McNulty, which again was no detail whatsoever, just the fact that we're having a hearing.
Any other comments or? Okay, I think we'll close out that issue. It looks like that this was more of a receive and file, that no action is required of the board today. If there's any further comments anybody would like to bring up at this point, but if not, then we'll go on to the next item, which is selection of a date for the next hearing board for an update of project activities.
I do have one thing, and I don't want to put Mr. Minery on the spot right now, but at some point I would like to get his opinion as to the matter raised by Mr. Roth about the legal right to abate nuisances associated with natural conditions. I hadn't looked into that thoroughly, but I would like to hear read Mr. Minery's opinion on that. And obviously, like I said, I don't want to put him on the spot today, but I think it would be something that would be interesting for the board to have.
Thank you, Mr. Reddy. And if I might interject for the rest of the board, there are a number of pending litigation matters related. I think we're at 9 or 11 or something like that from Friends of the Oceano Dunes against the Air Pollution Control District. So I'm extremely hesitant to make comments today on matters that are subject to pending litigation.
I might add, Mr. Reddy, that we can place a closed session item on the hearing board agenda, I do believe, for the next meeting that we have.
I don't know about that. This is Tim McNulty again. Given that this board, let me give that some thought before we go into closed session. I wasn't sure whether or not that's
not closed session today, but we do have lawsuits that this hearing board named upon as defendants. So that might change your.
I didn't know that.
Yes, I didn't think you did, or else you have to be able to have an avenue of discussing the legal lawsuits in closed session. So I don't think they would be preemptive. But we have plenty of time to discuss that.
Yes.
Are there any questions of the board prior to scheduling another hearing date, which I would suggest maybe sometime in the spring, either late May or early June?
Yeah, it's too far away. How about February? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, Bob.
Well, February.
Yeah, February.
The timing of February, I mean, it's always up to the hearing board when they want to have their next meeting. But that, I mean, yeah. For us, things that we might look at from happening in the springtime, I figured after the planting and everything was done. But it's up to the hearing board to decide when they want to meet next.
I would abide by Gary's suggestion, and I think perhaps if spring might be the better time.
And this is Mr. Johnson. I will concur with Mr. Reddy in regards to following the advice of the APCO.
Gary, can I just make a comment about our tight board of directors timeline in May and June?
Yeah, yes, you may.
Okay. Yeah, so as far as scheduling, it is between the end of May and the end of June is a real tight timeline for 2 back-to-back board of directors meetings. So I don't know if the hearing board would like to meet perhaps either after June or a little bit early, maybe earlier in May.
Or I think
March.
I'm sorry. In
March?
April or March?
Yeah, I agree. Timing wise, we're not ideal to be in there, but for the data back from what we're getting and being able to, have the hearing board provide some input into the next phase. March would work, and March, April. I understand your concerns about the regular board of directors meetings that are sandwiched tightly in those time periods. So I'll leave it to the board to decide what month they would like to have it. Obviously, the clerk would like to have it either early May or April, or March, April, early May.
I'm at the board's discretion, though. Disposal. One thing I might mention too, when we're considering, oh, Mr. Johnson, you're muted. But one thing that we should consider too is that right now with the governor's executive order allows us to meet virtually, but I don't know, looking forward how that might be affected. So a venue, if things are, if he cancels that executive order and we don't have the same opportunities to meet virtually, then we would have to locate a venue as well.
I think we can do the venue. I wouldn't worry about the venue. Plus, I don't think we're not. I think we're going to be still in this virtual meeting proxy until beyond that.
Okay.
I make a motion that the board, hearing board, should its next meeting for late February or early March. Excuse me, late March or early April.
Do we need somebody to make a motion in a second and take a vote on it?
Yes.
Okay. So Bob, are you making, or Mr. Carr, are you making a motion to schedule the next hearing board meeting?
Yeah.
Do we have a second?
Do we have a date?
Late February, early March is what the motion is.
Late March, early April.
Or late
Yeah,
March,
I think you said, yeah, I'll second that.
Okay. So late March, early April is what we're shooting for. Motion's made by Mr. Carr, second by Mr. Anderson. Okay. Roll call vote is going to be Mr. Reddy.
Aye.
Dr. Lapidus.
Aye.
Mr. Carr.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Anderson
Yes.
and Mr. Johnson. Yes. I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yes.
Thank you, sir. The motion is passes unanimously. So we will look to schedule the next hearing board meeting in late March, early April.
I just have a logistical question. So this work plan is, do I understand this correctly, that it was provisionally approved based upon the information that was presented today and upon further discussion about where the 90 acres will be and what will be done with that 90 acres? How does that process proceed from here?
Okay, so I will take back the feedback that I got today, and I have quite a tight timeline. I think it's just about a week to send out an approval letter that specifies what other things that we need to fill in the cracks. Like you need to specify the acreage by such and such date, and I will do that within the next week. So what we'll have is a certified timeline with my approval of this plan. When I place upon that plan these administrative requirements to get these documents in and get the area defined.
And there's a timeline for that, for when you need to have the documents back and this all needs to be approved?
It's very clear. It's in the stipulated order. I'm pretty sure it's 7 days. I'll have to get it out, but it's in within a couple of weeks of this hearing.
Okay. In 7 days.
7 days of the workshop, not necessarily a hearing, but it is a hearing and a workshop in one. So yeah, so it's going to come out in the next week. And like I said, it's going to be before December 1st for sure that these things are all done. We have to be ready to do any planting or whatever wind fencing or whatever we're doing, deciding upon those mitigations and where they're located. And like Carl was saying, we're going to be trying to focus on the Mesa 2 site. So we saw that great big reduction in the amount of these high peak days over 300 micrograms at CDF. We saw a good reduction in Mesa 2. It wasn't nearly as much as we saw at CDF. So, you know, all of this, the highest spot was CDF. We've knocked those huge peaks down. Very happy with that. Now we want to get the numbers down for the other peak at Mesa 2 to bring it down to the similar levels. And as the foredunes grow and the other mitigations become more mature, we're going to continue to see drops. And you know, with any luck, we'll have a lower wind year, and it'll, you know, it may just appear we've done a lot better than we did. Like I said, it's all like Carla said, and the other geomorphologists. The wind speed varies from year to year, so you have to normalize it. That's why we have those wind event days to counter. We judge things upon how many wind event days. So looking forward to seeing what we can get done out there this winter and spring.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all. If there's nothing further, we'll adjourn.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And I'll send my letter out to the board members. You'll get it